Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at something pretty wild. The strange, private meals presidents actually requested when the cameras stopped rolling and the weight of the whole country just sat right on their shoulders. We're going to see exactly what the stories on their dinner plates tell us about who they really were. So it's a super fascinating thing to think about, right? What do presidents actually eat in secret? You might picture these endless buffets of caviar and towering immaculate cakes. But here's the irony. The most powerful men in the world often craved the most humble, simple, or literally bizarre comfort foods way more than any fancy banquet. The contrast here is just striking. On one hand, you've got this expected White House diet. Elaborate roasts and those fancy French sauces, all designed to impress foreign diplomats. But on the flip side, we have their actual presidential cravings. Stuff like squirrel stew or cottage cheese absolutely smothered in ketchup. Honestly, some of these favorite foods were so embarrassing or just plain weird that the White House staff actually tried to hide them from guests. Okay, let's dive into this. To figure out why, we really need to look at the psychology behind these diets. In this explainer, we'll be exploring three main drivers: tastes of frontier survival, craving childhood comforts, and bizarre stress-eating habits. Section 1. Tastes of frontier survival. Eating to remember the roots of poverty and hardship. You see, a lot of our early leaders came from incredibly rugged backgrounds, and they used their daily meals to basically stay grounded and connected to their working class roots. To give you a good picture of this, imagine a dish called leather breeches. These were green beans that people would string up and dry out to cure, sometimes for literally months. When you were finally ready to eat them, you'd rehydrate them in water and then stew them low and slow with these big chunks of smoked bacon or salt pork until they got incredibly tender and smoky. It was a dish born out of pure necessity, just to make it through those brutal, long winters out on the frontier. And as it turns out, this happened to be the absolute favorite of Andrew Jackson. This tough, dueling war hero actually grew up incredibly poor in the Carolina backwoods. So even when he was living in the White House, with the finest chefs in the country at his fingertips, Jackson demanded this smoky dish. To him, it tasted like survival. Now sure, some guests found it super strange, but Jackson couldn't have cared less what anyone thought. It was just this daily, visceral reminder of exactly where he came from. This whole frontier craving thing continued with James A. Garfield, too. He actually shocked his White House guests by asking for slow-simmered squirrel stew. No joke. But think about it, for Garfield, who grew up in deep rural Ohio and went from being a canal boat worker all the way to the presidency, squirrel was just plentiful and reliable. When it was simmered down with vegetables into this thick stew, it tasted exactly like his childhood, unpretentious and honest. Then, to wrap up this theme, we have Andrew Johnson and a dish called Hoppin' John. It's basically a mix of black-eyed peas, rice, and just a little bit of bacon. Johnson grew up dirt poor in North Carolina and Tennessee, so this was working-class food that kept him alive when he had absolutely nothing to his name. Even after taking over the presidency right after Lincoln's assassination, he still demanded it. For him, eating this in the White House was his proof. It proved to himself that he had survived and completely clawed his way to the top. Section 2. Craving childhood comforts, using food as a time machine to simpler days. So when the immense, crushing pressure of running a whole country really sets in, a lot of presidents use their plates to time travel, going right back to the innocent, safe days of their youth before the world even knew their names. Even the very first president needed this kind of grounding. George Washington anchored himself during the Revolution with crispy hoe cakes drizzled with honey. These were just simple, flat cornmeal cakes, originally cooked by field workers right on the metal blades of their hoes over open fires. Now, Washington was secretly a massive ice cream fanatic, but instead of demanding grand feasts, he constantly asked for these crispy, honey-soaked Virginia hoe cakes. Why? Because they took him right back to a quiet farm life way before the revolution and politics completely consumed his days. And this brilliantly illustrates how deeply tied these leaders were to their home geography, especially during global crises. Take John F. Kennedy. While he was navigating the freezing, terrifying tensions of the Cold War, he anchored himself with briny New England clam chowder. It was literally the taste of summers in Massachusetts. Jimmy Carter, dealing with massive energy crises and national anxiety, started his mornings with a warm, steadying bowl of Georgia grits. And then you have Franklin D. Roosevelt, who managed to get through the Great Depression and World War II by eating gooey grilled cheese sandwiches. It brought him right back to childhood summers in Hyde Park, New York. Section 3. Bizarre stress-eating habits. Eccentric coping mechanisms under extreme pressure. Sometimes, The crazy stress of the Oval Office created some truly baffling culinary combinations, stuff that left both staff and foreign dignitaries totally scratching their heads. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just the sheer shock value of some of these habits. For example, Richard Nixon ate cottage cheese covered in ketchup. Yeah, he truly loved it. Just picture this for a second. The leader of the free world sitting right there in the Oval Office, spoon in hand, eating this bizarre, sweet and tangy mix while poring over intense reports. AIDS apparently tried it and instantly regretted it. But to Nixon, it was a comforting, frugal reminder of his roots in California during much tougher times. Then, oh man, there's Calvin Coolidge. Silent Cal completely baffled his dinner guests by quietly eating tangy pickles and sweet applesauce together on the exact same plate. I know, it sounds super strange to us today, but this was actually a very frugal Vermont farm tradition, built entirely around what families had stored up for the winter. He'd just sit there and eat it with his usual steady rhythm, finding absolute comfort in this super no-nonsense New England pairing. And then, for a pop of color, Ronald Reagan kept jars of jelly beans literally everywhere. We're talking on his desk, in the cabinet room, even on Air Force One. Originally, he used them to help him quit smoking, but these chewy, sweet candies quickly became this essential, comforting distraction for him during incredibly intense Cold War negotiations. The sound, that little click of jelly beans hitting a glass jar, literally became part of the soundtrack of his presidency. The ultimate humanizer, food as identity and a grounding force. So the crucial point is that while we usually just view presidents as these distant figures in history books or statues in parks, these strange, humble meals were the ultimate humanizer. They acted as a necessary grounding force for men carrying the weight of the entire world on their shoulders. To sum this whole thing up, I want to read you this really powerful quote from our source material. It goes, "Food isn't just food. It's where we come from. It's who we love. It's the story that stays with us long after the job is done." I just love that, because behind every major historical decision, every tense treaty, and every national crisis, there was a private dinner table offering a tiny, reassuring taste of home. Which finally brings us to you. Think about it. If you were sitting in the Oval Office right now, making the toughest decisions of your entire life, what would your presidential comfort food be? What's that one simple dish that takes you right back to your roots? It's pretty fascinating to think about, right? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder your answer to that question.